Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this new installment of Decameron in the time of Corona. And I'm Emily Colbert Cairns, an associate professor of Spanish in Newport, Rhode Island at Salve Regina University. And I'm here today with my colleague, Brian.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Brian.
I am Brian Phillips, an associate professor of Spanish at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. And welcome.
It's it's really exciting to be able to be here with Brian. We just had our edited volume published together entitled "Confined Women: The Walls of Female Space in Early Modern Spain," and it's a volume that's on open access with Hispanic issues online, and it's a really timely publication, as the title suggests. It's about the confinement and the constraints on women, and this is something that we're experiencing today in very real ways and in many different ways. And we think our volume can offer some perspective, some different ideas about what confinement looks like. Thinking in the past, we're looking at texts from the 15, 16, 1700s. We're looking at real historical figures. We're looking at literary texts that all discuss the confinement of women. And today, when we read the newspapers, there's different issues about um, domestic abuse and domestic violence. And I think a lot of us can relate to these topics. So, here today, what we wanted to do is just share two stories that stand out to us from this volume. And we invite you, we ask you to please look for it and read some more. Um, so I think I'll just begin and then I'll turn over the word to Brian. The text I'd like to talk about is a novella, a short novel from Maria de Sayas's collection, Enchantments and Disillusionments of Love. And thank you, Brian has them here so you can see. These are really popular texts from from the early modern period, and it was published in 1647. They're also like the Boccaccio's Decameron. These are also frame tales, and they center around this one character, Lysis, who is on her sickbed and she's confined, and she asks her friends to come over and tell her stories. Um, and so, um, one of the stories that stands out, just like we're trying to find things to do with our time, we're watching Netflix. One of the stories that stands out is a story called Innocence Punished. And in this story, there's a woman and she's married. She's a young woman. She's bewitched and she ends up sleepwalking every night to this other man's house that's not her husband. And she's in a trance and she doesn't know what's happening, but she ends up um, being found out, and she's punished for breaking the culture's honor code. And the way she's punished is she's literally walled into a chimney. She's punished by her brother, her sister-in-law, and her husband. And when she gets walled into this chimney, she lives in this tiny, tiny space in her own excrement. Her skin is eaten by flies. She lives there for 6 years. And um, she suffers in this confinement. This is an extreme case of confinement, but she's actually known as a walled-in woman, which is something that we see throughout literature and actually also in real real historical figures. Some of them did it voluntarily, but this is a story. She's eventually, well, I won't give you the end. I won't give the end away, but um, this is a story about a woman who is confined in a really severe way. Um, so I think with that, Brian, can I turn it over to you?
Of course. Thank you for that, Emily. I think that this story, by the way, is one of the most um, grotesque and yet fascinating stories of this collection of novels or novelas by Maria de Sayas. And I think that and not to plug too much our own volume here, but that's what I'm going to do. Um, not only can you see that story, but that story as it's related to other chapters within our volume. For example, those women who were confined to these small places called emparedadas or walled-in women, were many times religious women who voluntarily did this to themselves, and some of them carried around a little prayer book with this prayer called the Prayer of the Walled-in Woman that they would recite while in confinement. And one of the chapters of our volume actually deals with this, in addition to many other things. And so I think that because our volume does cover many of these gendered space issues, it is a volume that we tried to offer to a public that would perhaps be interested in multiple stories. Some of those stories are more current. For example, you can find things that have to do with the Me Too movement or series online. And some stories, such as Dr. Colbert-Carnes' chapter, deal with Cervantes. And so I would like to speak on a story that has to do with Cervantes that you actually won't find in the volume. It's called El Licenciado Vidriera, or the Glass Lawyer in English. So Cervantes published, after his publication of the Quijote, he published a set of what he called novelas ejemplares, or exemplary novels. And each of these little stories are supposed to give us some sort of example. Traditionally, these examples would be sort of moralistic tales that would teach you how to live a good Christian life or something like along those lines. Cervantes' stories, I'm not sure if we can say they do this. So without further ado, we'll get into the story and we'll see if our viewership might be able to see if they do set an example. So the Glass Lawyer, Tomás Rodaja, which in English would be Thomas Slice. So this is important. So Tomás Rodaja is found on the banks of the river Tormes, which borders the city of Salamanca, which is a place known to have a very important university during the 15th and 16th centuries. So Tomás Rodaja is found on the river by two students on their way to Salamanca to study, and he is looking to serve these two students, or anybody really. He's looking for a job. These two students decide to employ him, and for the next few years, he studies alongside them, which was something that was commonly done during this time period. Wealthy young gentlemen might take a servant under their wing, and they would allow that servant to study with them as they were being served by this young person. So after a few years, both of these wealthy gentlemen returned to their hometown of Malaga. Thomas Slice goes with them, but he decides that he wants to continue studying. He's really good at it. He wants to become a lawyer, so he convinces the young gentleman to supply him with enough money to go back to Salamanca and study for 3 years. However, along the way, he encounters a infantry captain who convinces him to go off to Italy and live alongside him, basically. So he does this for the next year or two. He goes to Italy, and on his return to Spain, because he gets tired of being in the army and traveling, he returns to his studies. When he does this, he's sort of a worldly person now. He's seen things, he's seen beauty, he's seen a lot of variety of things. And so he not purposefully, um, uh, he woos a courtesan woman who falls madly in love with him, but Tomas is not interested. So this courtesan, uh, she hires a morisco, which is a religious convert from Islam to Christianity, which is significant because we understand strange magical things coming from otherness. So she hires this Morisco to construct a love potion for Tomas. And Tomas eats a quince filled with this love potion, and he becomes terribly ill. The courtesan woman runs away. We don't see anything from her during the rest of the story. And Tomas is really sick for some time, but he manages to come out of it in a way. Not completely. He's still mentally not himself. And this is when he begins to think that he is made of glass. And so he is now called the glass lawyer. And what that means is, for him, that nobody can touch him. And if anyone touches him, he will break. And so whenever somebody tries to, he screams and cries and throws a fit. But he says that because of the qualities of glass, being transparent for the most part and fragile, that his spirit or his soul is somehow connected to the divine more clearly. So he can respond to anyone's questions, whatever they may be. So his responses are what are interesting here. Not only is Tomas practicing now social distancing as the glass lawyer, because he will not allow anyone to touch him, but he is also distant from common responses to questions. And I'll just give one of these sort of witticisms that he uses as a response. So for example, he is asked by a person in the town what to do to avoid being envious of other people. And Tomas says, you should sleep, because when you are asleep, everyone is equal. So these, so these are the sorts of responses that the glass lawyer is giving to people. So he's this way for a couple of years. He gains a lot of fame. People are following him around. But he still has to be protected by some sort of royal guards, because the young boys of the towns that he's in, Valladolid and Salamanca, they try to throw rocks at him to see if he will break. And so in this regard, his social distancing is also relegated to sort of protective wear in the form of guards, the things that we have to use as well, masks and gloves and these sorts of things. So long story short, this goes on for a couple of years, and an ecclesiastic comes to town and cures Tomas of his belief that his body is now glass. So he now is not Thomas Slice, and he's not the glass lawyer. He now calls himself Tomas Rueda, or Tomas Wheel, meaning that he has gone through a phase of, let's call it, transformation, which I believe that many of us are going through now.
Yep.
I wonder what we will be like after we are out of our glass phase. That remains to be seen. In any case, his responses are not as witty as they once were. And so he is not able to have a successful career as a normal lawyer. He could only have one as a glass lawyer. So he decides to join the army again, and he runs off, and we never see anything or hear anything from him again. So I think that with that, we have some ideas on how this coronavirus and distancing and illness and confinement may give us some things to talk about. And I'll leave it there for you, Emily, if you have anything to say.
Well, I think this. I hope that we don't I hope that we don't turn into the wheels, the wheel type of lawyer. But I do think that these issues we're facing, it's hard in the moment, but they have these issues of plague, of confinement, as we've seen throughout with our volume, with which we've seen in the other videos that are part of this this collection. These are topics that have come up again and again and again throughout history. And I think it is useful to have these other models to think about and grapple with the same questions that we've all been grappling with over many years. And it's
Mhm.
been so yeah, it's been really nice having a chance to connect virtually with you, Brian, and with um, anybody who's watching this video.
Likewise, thank you everyone for watching our video, and we hope you enjoy. Leave comments.